Welcome to Marking the End Times. I'm Mark Hitchcock, and as you can see here, I'm not in my office. I'm at home in Edmond, Oklahoma. My wife Cheryl and I are on an Alaska cruise. We're on a Holland Cruise Line ship called the Westerdam, and we're way up in the northern part of the Inner Passage. I'm in Juneau, Alaska yesterday, and we're headed up right now to the Hubbard Glacier to kind of see that here from the boat. We're on this tour. I was invited to come on this tour with Amir Sarfati. I know many of you know about Amir. You know about his ministry called Behold Israel. And so my wife Cheryl and I are on this week-long cruise. And I'm one of the speakers. Amir, one of his friends with his ministry, is a man named Mike Golay. And then some of you know Pastor Barry Stagner, who's out in California. He's here speaking as well. So we're here in this beautiful environment. Yesterday we stopped in Juneau, Alaska. It was one of our stops. Tomorrow we'll be at Sitka, then we'll be at Ketchikan, then we'll go on down to Victoria Island, and we'll head back to Seattle and be back in Oklahoma City. But it's been a great time here, great time of fellowship. There's about 1,000 people here from all over the United States, really all over the world for this conference. We have a room that we've got all the people packed in, and so I'm doing some teaching, and so are these other men. And what I want to do today, really on Marking the End Times, that my message this morning that I shared here on the cruise ship was about American prophecy. The title of the message was The Late Great United States. And I know that I've done a video sometime back about America and prophecy, but what I thought I'd do is take a few minutes and share a little bit about what I shared in that message, about kind of some things that you and I need to be doing as we live in a collapsing culture. There's kind of 4 keys I see in the Bible to national blessing, of how a nation can experience God's blessing. So I thought I would talk about that. In the message today. In a little bit, we'll go to the subscriber-only section. And one question I'm going to answer is a really fitting question for where I am. Someone sent in a question about Sasquatch or Bigfoot. And we were just in Juneau yesterday walking around, and there were several places where there are images of Bigfoot or Sasquatch there. So someone's asking about that, if that could be part of the Nephilim or some kind of deception. So I'll answer that question. There's another question about Zechariah chapter 4. The images that are there of the olive trees and the lampstands, what does that mean, and does it have any relationship to the end times? And then the other question I want to answer is a question about solar flares and possible blackouts that could be coming. Does that have any relationship to Revelation chapter 8 or Revelation chapter 16? So when we get to the subscriber only section in a minute, we'll answer a few of those questions. But I want to talk about this whole idea of America and prophecy. I don't believe America is mentioned in Bible prophecy, certainly not directly. There's no mention of America, the United States, in the Bible. But a lot of people think America is mentioned indirectly. They'll look at passages like Isaiah 18, the unnamed nation there, or they'll say America is the 10 lost tribes of Israel, or America is the young lions of Tarshish in Ezekiel 38. Or some will say that America is Babylon in Revelation chapters 17 and 18. But I don't think any of those places are America in prophecy. I think the scripture is silent about America, which I think is significant, because if we were the great superpower we are today, then I think the Bible certainly would mention us. It mentions nations like Rosh or Russia. It mentions Persia or Iran. It mentions the kings of the East, which probably include India and China. So I think if we were the superpower we are today, we'd be mentioned. So I think something has to happen to America to reduce us from our superpower status. And I think that event's going to be the rapture of the church. All the salt and light will be extracted out of America in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye. And when that takes place, America is going to be reduced, I think, to being a second or third rate nation overnight. But when we think about that and think about God's judgment really on America in the future, we need to think about, how do we live in America today where we see a crumbling, collapsing culture around us. Erwin Lutzer has one of his books where he says really there's 3 things we can do in America. We can be complicit, we can be complacent, or we can be courageous. And I kind of added to that, to be complicit means that we kind of give in. We give into the culture and just become part of it. To be complacent means we give up. We just kind of give up and give out. But to be courageous means we give all. that we give everything to the Lord and to the church and to God's people, and we serve Him and stand for Him in these times in which we live. In fact, Lutzer has a quote in one of his books, Dr. Lutzer does. He says, "The day of the casual Christian is over. No longer is it possible to drift along," which that's what we're doing right now in the boat. No longer can you just kind of drift along, hoping that no tough choices will have to be made. At this point in American history, any moral and spiritual progress will have to be won at a great cost. The darker the night, the more important every candle becomes. So we don't want to just be people that curse the darkness around us. We want to shine as lights. Jesus said we're the light of the world, and that we wanted to do that in this culture in which we live. There's a quote I read years ago that I love. It says that the world at its worst needs the church at its best. And our world today is at its worst. And the church today needs to be at our best. We need to be seizing the opportunities that God has given to us and living lives that are pleasing in God's sight. But let me just transition here for a moment and give 4 keys to national blessing. 4 things I see in the Bible for God to bless a nation, to bless America or to bless any other nation. And we need to think about these and apply these to our own lives and our own churches in these times in which we live. The first one is to support the nation of Israel, to support Israel. All the way back in Genesis 12, verse 3, God gave really the only foreign policy statement in all the Bible. When He said to Abraham, "Whoever blesses you, I will bless." And then it's very emphatic. He says, "The one who curses you, I must curse." So support for the Jewish people brings blessing, and cursing of the Jewish people brings cursing. And we've seen that played out really throughout all of history. And it's still valid today. It continues to be God's foreign policy today. And one of the things we need to do here in America is support the nation of Israel. And one of the problems is support for Israel in our nation today is eroding. It's waning. There's actually more Democrats in America today favor the Palestinians over Israel for the first time in any American political party. So for the very first time, you've got more Democrats favor Palestinians over Israel. Most young Americans view Israel unfavorably. 56% of Americans between 18 to 29 view Israel unfavorably. Here's a really stunning statistic I heard recently. The majority of Americans aren't sure whether President Biden favors the Palestinians or Israel. Now, I have an inkling of which he favors, but it's not good for our country to be unsure about that. We ought to know that our president favors the nation of Israel. And so one of the things that we need to do as a nation is to support Israel. It doesn't mean that we agree with everything that the Jewish government does, but we want to be supporters of Israel. When we do that, God will bless our nation. And I think in spite of all the other problems in America that we've had through the years, one of the reasons God has had His hand of blessing upon us is because our nation has been the chief supporter of Israel. And the second thing we need to do is pray for our country. That's a key to national blessing. In 1 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 2, we're told to pray for those in authority over us, to pray for our leaders, our national leaders, to pray for those who rule over us. And we need to do that as people in our nation. That's one of the ways that God blesses us. You know, one of the things that people often talk about or think about is praying 2 Chronicles 7:14. Let me read this verse. Most of you know this. "If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face, turn from their wicked ways, I'll hear from heaven, forgive their sin, and heal their land." But notice it goes on and says, "Now my eyes will be open and my ears attentive to the prayers offered in this place. I have chosen and consecrated this temple so that my name will be there forever." This passage in 2 Chronicles 7 is when Solomon is dedicating the temple. And God's telling Solomon, look, someday when the people disobey, and I bring discipline on them, the disciplines of Deuteronomy chapter 28, and they pray to me from this place, the temple, then I'll come and heal their land. So we need to remember that passage is a promise, a specific promise to the nation of Israel and their land and their temple. Now, I think we can make an application of that today, but it's not a promise to America. Certainly, it's always good to humble ourselves and to pray and to seek God. We can apply it to ourselves, but we need to understand that's not a direct promise to America today. But we do need to pray for our nation. Another thing is we need to promote missions and the gospel. Romans chapter 10 says, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news. Now, we don't often think of our feet being the most beautiful part of us, but feet that spread the good news are beautiful to God. And God blesses a nation and a people who spread the good news. And America has been the greatest missionary nation of all time. We need to continue to do that and spread the gospel, and God will continue to bless us. And then a final thing is practice godliness in our lives. In the Psalms, it says, righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. One of the ways to have blessing upon our country is to be a righteous nation. And we know about all the sin and the pollution in our culture, and I can't do anything about that, but I can control my own life. And a lot of people today that are decrying all the sin in our culture are living lives themselves that are sub-Christian, that aren't really living up to the righteous standards that God has for us. Remember in the book of Isaiah, in Isaiah chapters 1-6, Isaiah says, woe to the people 6 times for their sins. But finally he gets to chapter 6 and he says, woe is me. For I'm a man of unclean lips. I live among a people of unclean lips. So we need to live godly lives. We don't want to contribute to the corruption in our culture. You know, in 1 John 3, it says that everyone who fixes his hope on him purifies himself as he is pure. So if we believe that Jesus can come back at any moment, that should be a purifying hope in our lives. So those are 4 things that we can do to have blessing upon our nation. Support Israel, pray for our nation and our leaders, promote missions and the preaching of the gospel, and practice godliness in our lives. Let me just close with this story. Back on May the 19th, 1780, it was a remarkable day in the Northeast in America. There was a great darkness that came over the land. It was very ominous, and people thought that it was the end of the world. And in Hartford, Connecticut, the legislature was meeting there. And many concluded that this was the end, and so that the House of Representatives adjourned. They stopped meeting, thought it was over. But in the Senate, someone brought up a motion to adjourn. And Colonel Abraham Davenport was the leader of the Senate at that time, and he said this: I'm against an adjournment. The day of judgment is either approaching or it's not. If it's not, there's no cause for an adjournment. If it is, I choose to be found doing my duty. I wish, therefore, that candles would be brought in. I love that story because there is a descending darkness in our country today, but as the darkness descends, let's not just curse the darkness, let's bring in the candles. Let's keep working so we can be found faithful when Jesus comes. Let's be found doing our duty, living in the light, keep looking and loving and laboring as we await the coming of Jesus Christ. Well, thank you for watching the video here today, and we're going to move now to the subscriber-only section. We'll answer those questions that I mentioned earlier. If you're not a subscriber and you'd like to be one, you can go to endtimes.com for $7 a month, and you can become a subscriber in this ministry. So thanks again for watching, and thanks for all the subscribers. And we're enjoying it here in Alaska. Thank you for sharing with me and part of the journey here. And we'll look forward to seeing you next week back from Edmond, Oklahoma.